Welcome back to another episode of the Shine and Thrive Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Monica, and you are in for a treat today because I'm chatting with Tavia Redburn, who is a birth and newborn photographer, all about the power of niching down and how she turned her birth photography business into a six-figure business. And just to break down a little bit about what we talked about the key decisions you need to make when wanting to go full time in your photography business, when your photography business in your specific niche. And also, how much Tavia makes on average when documenting births. This might surprise you, actually, of what's possible for you, and how much a photographer can charge during different phases of their birth photography career. So, if you're like, I just don't know where to start with charging, we cover that. Also, we chat about how to navigate being on call as a birth photographer and so much more. So, now with all that said, let me introduce Tavia to you with a short story of her inspiring journey that she shared with me. And I love how she was able to just like sum up so much of her journey in this one beautiful paragraph. So, Tavia Redburn is a birth and newborn photographer in Oklahoma City. In 2017, she was homeschooling her three kids and running two businesses while her husband was miserable climbing the corporate ladder. That winter, God completely stirred up their marriage and their life when her husband told her he'd been quietly suffering for a decade in a career he hated and he felt stuck in. They decided to accelerate their 5-year plan to a 1-month plan to retire him. So that summer, Tavia retired her 31-year-old husband from his 9 to 5 with her birth photography business. Now she teaches other photographers how to build a 6-figure photography studio to quit their 9 to 5 or retire their partner just like she did. I mean, how powerful and inspiring is that? So, with all that said, I cannot wait for you to enjoy diving into this episode. Okay, Tavia, hi, welcome. I'm so excited to have you on the Shine and Thrive podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so stoked because you're the first birth photographer I have on here. And I know there's so many photographers that are, so intrigued by this genre of photography because it's something that is, I feel like, in a way, less easy to just dive into or try on, right? Initially, I know there's been so many times where like my friends have been pregnant and I'm like, oh, can I just document your birth just because I wanted to just experience it at least once? Like I know I don't think I want to dive into it fully because we'll talk about it more, but there's like it's a commitment of like, you being available and more on call and all of that. But somehow for some reason it never worked out for me. The timing for me never worked out. So I've actually never tried it before, but I know it's on my bucket list to at least once try it on and just experience that because it must be so magical. But yeah, I'm just so excited to have you on because I think your story is so incredibly inspiring with how you have been able to, take charge of your life and business and grow your business in the direction that you wanted to, not only doing what you love, what you specifically want to do, it fills your heart up, but on top of that, be able to support your family of 5 and you being the sole income provider and helping your husband quit his job that he was just like, he felt so stuck in, he didn't love anymore. And so you were able to do that for him as well. You were able to retire him at 31 years old. So that's so incredible. So I can't wait to just dive in and talk about the topic all about, the power of niching down, because that's what you did, and how you turned your birth photography business into a 6-figure revenue business. So my first question to you is actually about, the niching down part, because every single type of photography has pros and cons to it. So for example, I specialize just in wedding photography. So that along with that comes with long hours on weekends, right? Maybe I miss out on a lot of like family and friend gatherings and events and all of that. So you have to literally love that niche enough to accept the cons of it and make them be like, oh, whatever, I'll still handle that, right? So I would love to know from you, like, how did you decide on niching down on birth photography? Like, what were those signs for you that you couldn't ignore where you're like, I love it too much. I know I want to go in this direction.
Yeah, great question. And I think this short and simple answer is that it didn't feel like work. Like it was the one thing that I was photographing that I was like, if I could literally only do this, I would be so happy. And so at first it was the first birth that I ever photographed. I just fell in love. And if anyone listening has ever photographed a birth and they loved it, like you just want more. You want more of that experience. You want more of that gift that you're giving those families. Like you just want more of it. And so the very first time that I photographed a birth, I was hooked. And I was just like, but this was 2012. So birth photography, you think it's kind of new now. 10 years ago, it was really, really new and unknown. And so then it just became for me figuring out how to educate my community so they knew that they needed birth photography so that I could do more of it. So I think the simple answer is just, it didn't feel like work.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. And I'm so curious, did you have any fears that popped up that were kind of like more logical thoughts of like, but can I really make, a living out of this? And or am I good enough? Or even like a limiting belief, like if I become a birth photographer, I won't be able to have a life because I have to be on call. Like, did you have any of those things pop up?
The on-call thing was not even on my radar. I didn't even care. Like I wanted
That's
to be there
amazing.
so bad that I didn't even care about being on call. It's like I'll do whatever it takes. It was so new that I don't think I really had any of those thoughts. Like at the time in my business, I wasn't thinking, I want to make six figures. I want to retire my husband. I was really just like, I found this thing that I love and I want to do more of it. Like I just want to continue to do this. And so those other things weren't really on my radar. It was 100% just passion. Like, how can I find more of this?
Okay, got it. And so at that point, were you at all, was it just like, were you two parents yet? Or you were already parents?
Yeah. So
And
in
you already
2012, we had
didn't
two
think that way.
kids.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we had two kids at the time. And, my husband had a full-time job. And so it was just sort of like, I love this birth photography. How can I keep making it happen?
That's so cool. Because the first, like a lot of the time, I find that people like, James Wedmore, he says, don't argue for your limitations, right? So a lot of the time, people or photographers say, well, I can't get into it because I have kids. And then, it'll take up, I have to be on call. And what if I can't find childcare? And it's all these what ifs, right? But it's like, but what if you could find solutions for those things and still just do something you love? So I find it actually really incredible that you just straight bypassed doing all that like hard arguing for your limitations work and you just like followed your curiosity, followed that like instinct. So that's incredible. Do you have any like tips for any photographers that do have those thoughts pop up of like how to, if they have photographed a birth and they're like, I'm just so in love with it, but how, like what advice would you give them to just like get over that?
The things that I usually hear most often are what you said. I can't find childcare. How do I find childcare? And what's it like being on call? Can I be on call? What do I do if I have a portrait session and somebody goes into labor? And what I always tell my students is everything about birth photography is about over communication with everyone involved. So whether that's your clients, whether that's your family, whether that's your kids, whether that's your childcare, like really over communicating the what ifs. So, like with your client, hey, if I have a portrait session, I already have a plan in place to leave that portrait session and come to you. Or if you don't want to do it that way, you say, if I have a portrait session, I'm going to finish that up and come to you as soon as I'm done and send it back up until I'm there in person. And so there's really not a right or wrong. Photographers are always like, what should I do? The should word. And really
Yeah.
there's no should. It's just deciding about the what ifs in those situations and communicating that ahead of time with your client. And so that's number one, is determining the what ifs and coming up with an answer and a plan for all of them. As well as when it comes to childcare, and you just said it really well, when it comes to those limiting beliefs of like, I can't find on-call childcare, like I don't have any family in town, which that was our thing. We had family in town. That made it super simple. And I completely acknowledge that. But are you really giving it your all to find on-call childcare? Or are you like, well, Tavia said she has family. I don't have family. I can't do this.
Hmm.
Or are you starting to think outside the box and think like, are there other birth workers I can trade off with? Or are there other people in my community that I could hire to be on call for me? And when do I really need that on-call childcare? For most people in my audience anyway, it's 40 hours a week when their partner is at work. And so they think like, oh, I can't find on-call childcare. And it's like, really, you probably just need childcare those 40 hours, and it's what if childcare. And so when you start to break down something that feels really big and scary of like on-call childcare into when do I actually need childcare and who can I reach out to help me with this, and start to remind yourself it is possible to do this, it starts to become possible to do that.
Yeah. When you ask yourself better questions, right? Like
Right.
it's kind of like your brain automatically will give you the answers that you couldn't possibly have thought of if you just blocked off the idea of it even being possible for you. Like you wouldn't have even found that. I love how you said over communicate and think of all the different what if scenarios and have an answer for that or a plan for that. And right away, what popped into my head is like imagining like if I was going to decide to go this route and become a birth photographer, I would probably sit down at my desk and write out all the what if scenarios and then decide what I would want to do as a person, my own artist, and also create boundaries in my life. So it's like, if I was during shooting a portrait session, what feels right to me? Does it feel right to leave that portrait session, or does it do I feel better to stay and have the backup photographer shoot the birth, right? Like, so is that kind of what you did? Did you intuitively design like your boundaries and how you would operate, and then it all just like it worked for you because you communicated? So, you set expectations.
I wish it was that beautiful. I wish it was that thoughtful and beautiful. No, what happened is I made a lot of mistakes
Yeah.
and I did a lot of things wrong. And I was like, okay, well, I don't want to do that again. Like
Right.
the
Yeah.
time that I had a client pay me the deposit, which was $100 at the time, and then decide that she didn't want birth photography anymore. After I had been on call for her for weeks and she still owed me her balance, but her doctor said she was going to have a C-section and she thought, I don't want a C-section. I don't want photos of a C-section. So I don't want you to come. And I texted her and told her, you're going to be forfeiting your deposit. And she was okay with that because it was only $100.
Yeah.
And so it was that hard lesson that led me to like, okay, that doesn't have anything to do with being on call, but that was just the first like birth hard lesson that popped into my head of like, okay, I'm changing my deposit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that, that's kind of the benefit of having a mentor, right? Is
Yeah.
you get to learn those things kind of the easier way, and you don't have to experience things the hard way, and you can learn those lessons from somebody who's already done it.
Yeah, I love how you said that because that's so true. Like that's exactly what I experienced. I learned all the answers that so far that I know for my business through those mistakes and challenges and all of that. But like as soon as you said, think of all the what ifs and have an answer for that. It because like your technique that was already like an amazing um guide for me to even think that way. I feel like I was able to then bypass, if I were to go that route, bypass all those years of trial and error to then be like, okay, I'll just have if this happens, I'll do this list, right? But that doesn't obviously eliminate any like you're still going to come across like problems and situations. So like, do you now have an answer for, okay, if someone goes into a C-section, I communicate ahead of time what their options are. Like now you do that. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. We have
exactly.
a super detailed consultation list that's like, here, if this happens, that, and we talk about it ahead of time because I always say disappointment is unmet expectations. And
Yes.
so if I can tell my clients ahead of time, if a C-section happens, this, if you're having a home birth and you transfer this, and that way they don't feel like they got ripped off because I wasn't actually in there during the C-section. We'd already talked about what will happen if they have a C-section.
Amazing. I love that. Okay, so I want to take it into the direction of chatting about how to create a six-figure business with birth photography, and when you're especially like niche down, because like, well, a lot of my listeners know the power of niching. I talk about it all the time because that is what I do, and that has what worked well for me. And I've generalized before and felt I've experienced that world, and I've seen all the benefits when I transitioned over to niching. So I think where I want to take the conversation now is to maybe ask you like, what are some key decisions that a photographer needs to make when choosing to grow their business to the point of quitting their full-time job and going full-time or retiring their partner? Like where they even start if like that's the goal? Okay, where do they go?
Yeah, I'm so glad that we're on the same page with the niching thing because I
Yeah.
get a lot of resistance for that. And I'm sure you do too, because it feels scary. It feels like, you know, but if somebody wants to hire me for senior photos, why wouldn't I do that? I need to make money. Or if somebody wants to hire me for wedding photos and I'm a birth photographer, why wouldn't I do that? And so I think that the very first step in creating your business is choosing a niche, but understanding that it's okay if you change your mind.
Mm,
It's not the end of the world if you do weddings for 6 months or 4 months or 3 months and you're like, actually, you know what, this isn't for me. That doesn't mean you're a terrible business person or a terrible photographer. Everybody's like laughing behind your back. It just means that you learned a lesson and you
yeah.
decided that's not what you want to do. And the only way to fail at your goal is to give up on your goal. And so if you're like, okay, well, I don't want to do weddings anymore, I'm going to try something else, that's totally fine. But what I would recommend is kind of dipping your toe in a few niches when you're first starting out. Build your portfolio a little bit in a few areas and see what that thing is that you're just like, I would do this for free. Like, I love this so much. It doesn't even feel like work. And once you feel that, that is a nudge that you're like heading in the right direction. And once you have figured out what that thing is, then it becomes a matter of getting as much experience as humanly possible in the shortest amount of time possible for you. That's what I mean. That's how I roll. I'm big into just like taking action and not overthinking too much. And so it's like, okay, I love birth photography. I want to shoot as many births as I possibly can in a short amount of time so that I can build my portfolio and get experience and quickly work towards charging full price. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what I did. And that's what I recommend my students do is heavily discounting your prices, knowing that these people are not going to be your ideal clients, but the discounting purpose is to build your portfolio and get experience and start to be known in your community as a birth photographer so you can work towards charging full price.
I love that. Yes, everything. Yes to everything you said, and you explained it so well. And is there, because you said it was step one, so is there a step two to that?
So step two would probably be step two. Step one is choosing a niche
Hmm.
that you love. Step two is then building your portfolio and getting a ton of experience with that thing so that you're eventually working towards full price. And I think step three would be then putting that niche on blast. Like you're doing
Right.
all the things to get in front of your ideal client. You're connecting with the midwives and the birth workers, and you're on social media. When somebody clicks on your social media, it's birth photos. Like it is what
Yeah.
you want to do.
Okay, got it. That I love how you broke that down so simply. Three different steps. And then yeah, when you're in step one, like when you are like doing that whole situation of like dipping your toe and like seeing what lights you up the most, then that's what you're focused on. So don't the biggest thing I'd say that you should stay away from, and Tavia, you'll probably agree with me, is in that moment when you're um checking out to see what excites you the most, is do not look at other photographers and compare yourself to, oh, they're already there and I'm not there yet, because it's going to take away your focus from you actually paying attention to your intuition and what you really want. So it's like, I love how you explain that, because then maybe you could do like, okay, step one, I'm going to focus on the next 2 months on step one. I'm going to shoot a lot of different things and see what lights my soul on fire. Okay, step two, for the next 2 months, I'm going to get 3 births, 4 births documented. I'm going to ask everywhere and I'm going to make it happen no matter what it takes. Step three, okay, I have my portfolio. Like I have so much in my portfolio now. It's like everyone needs to know I'm a birth photographer and I'm amazing at it. And there you go. So it's like if you just break it down that way and focus, always focus every day in that step on that one thing you're supposed to be doing, that's how you can accelerate really quickly. So thank you.
Focus.
Yes, focus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to say one thing about the portfolio building phase, and I actually did a whole episode on this topic of like when to know to go from model call pricing, portfolio building pricing to full price, because that always seems to be like a struggle, kind of a gray area. But please charge something for when you're portfolio building. Portfolio building doesn't have to mean free, especially with something like birth. I've seen so many photographers that are wanting to do birth get burned because the family who is paying or who is hiring them is not paying them. So they're not fully invested. So they find out like, 5 days after the due date, they already had the baby and they didn't call them. And I've seen that so many times. So even if you do like a refundable deposit, even if you're like, I really don't want to charge, it stresses me out because I don't know a lot about this. And I'm worried I'm not going to do a good job. Even have them do, a $200 refundable deposit that you give back to them after you photograph their birth. But if they don't call you, you keep that money because your time is valuable. Being on call can be hard. And so please charge at least something.
Oh my God, that is genius. Thank you for sharing that. Because like you said, if they're not invested and they change their minds and you don't show up, you're missing your opportunity. You could have had someone else that you could have been photographing at that time, and then it takes you longer to build your portfolio. So that is genius. Thank you for sharing that. Such a great idea. Okay, so then when it comes to pricing, I would love it if you could share with everybody so everybody can know it's possible for them, what you charge and also what you recommend, birth photographers charge in different phases of their birth photography career.
Yeah, absolutely. So our top package is $2,800, which is not wedding prices, but we're getting there. When I started out in birth photography, it was, did I say wedding photography or birth
You
photography?
said you said when I started you said it's not wedding photography prices.
It's not.
Yeah. And then you said
I did
when you
mean that.
started in birth photography.
Thank you. When
Yep.
I started in birth photography, $500 was kind of the ceiling. Like it was really, really low.
Wow. Was
Nobody
that back
really
in
knew.
2012?
Yeah. Like around
Wow.
here anyway, I live in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Around here, $500 to $800 was the ceiling. And I was chatting with a friend one time who had photographed maybe 2 or 3 births, and I had photographed over 20. And she told me she was charging the same price as me, which was $800 then. And I thought, oh, so people are like noticing what I'm charging and like coming up to it, but they don't want to go above that. So it's like, I'm going to raise my prices and see what happens. So I raised to like 12, and we have packages. So when I'm sort of talking about our middle, like what most people spend.
Mm-hmm.
So we went from like 1250, 1500, 1800, 21, 28. So like every time we raised it, people kept spending that. And so that's like a benefit to being known for something in your area as like the go-to person for that is you really can charge whatever you want to charge.
It's true. Yeah, because they know that you're obviously specialized in it. That means that you're really good at it. And on top of that, price is just price. It doesn't mean anything. It's the value that people put on what they're getting that means something to them. So I'm excited for you. I can't wait for it to hit 5,000.
Yeah. And a lot of our students do have $5,000 packages. So we
Oh,
live in a
that's
pretty low
amazing.
cost of living area, but we have students in like San Diego, Seattle, like higher cost of living places that are charging $5,000 for their birth packages. So it's exciting to be like close to wedding packages. You know what I mean?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. And then so what are the different phases that you would recommend? Like if someone is well, you would know that how to break down the phases, yeah, of like how
Yeah.
much photographers should be charging.
Yeah. Um, so I'd never tell somebody like what they should be charging, but what I
Yes.
will say is what I tell my students to do is to set their someday price. Set their price where they want it to be within a year or so. And you do that by, I'm sure you've talked about pricing and all of that stuff, but looking at not only your hard costs and what you want to pay yourself, but also including on-call childcare into that, if that's something you're going to have to pay for, and put that into your fee and then heavily discount it while you're building your portfolio. So for example, if your someday price is going to be $2,000 and you want to do 50% off for your first 5 clients or even more. Some of my students will do 70, 80% off because they just want to get paid something and get their foot in the door. And again, remember, these are not your ideal clients. So these are not people that are probably going to hire you at $2,000. And that's okay because the point here is to get experience. And so depending on your hard costs, you can figure out what that percentage is, but just heavily discount it for your first 5, then back off on the discount a little bit. So you might do like 80% for the first 5, 70% for the next 5, 60, etc., until you're comfortable getting to where you're charging full price.
Okay. I love that. I love that model. Simple. And yeah, you just kind of would go intuitively with how confident you feel in the experience that you're providing and also the demand, how many people are inquiring and interested, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's when you start to go, okay, is it time to raise my price? Like if you're booking, if people are like peeing on a stick and booking you, which is what was happening to us for many, many years, then it's like, okay, it's time to raise the price and start to see like where people fall off. And you've kind of hit your limit.
I love that you just said that. I'm like, I would have never thought about that because like weddings are so different. You're like, people are peeing on a stick and booking you right away. It's time to raise your prices.
Yeah, that's a
That's so
one-liner.
funny. That is a great one-liner. Oh my God. I feel like that's going to be a quote that I post on my Shine and Thrive podcast Insta feed. If they're peeing on a stick and booking you right away, you need to raise your prices. Bam, by Tavia.
Yep. Yep. It's so
Oh my
true.
God. That's so funny. Okay, so I'm curious now, how many birth clients on average do you have in a year? And like, is there do you feel like you have to cap it based on work-life harmony? Or what is that like magic number that works for you? Because I know every person would be different, but yeah, I'm
Yeah,
so
our
curious.
happy number, let's see. I think in 2020 we only did 20 births, but that was 2020.
Mhm.
um
That's funny. That
I,
was 20 births.
yeah, I know that is kind of
2020,
funny.
20.
Uh-huh. I think our highest year was 38.
Yeah.
And that was when I had a girl on my team helping me photograph births as well. And
Mhm.
so I personally would not ever take on 38 because to me, I want to take off 2 full months out of the year off call and then
Mhm.
do 3 to 4 a month on the months that I'm on. So that would be about 30 probably a year.
Okay,
So I
cool.
would think similar to weddings, like the number of weddings people would want to take.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
There's
And I'm
just things to
curious.
consider, like,
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
No,
There's
no, go
just
ahead.
things
Go ahead.
to consider, like, do you want to have vacation time? And are there significant dates that you don't want to miss? So, like, for example, um, Christmas is a time that I didn't want to miss with my kids. And so I almost never took clients from that had due dates from like January 15th or excuse me, November 15th to January 15th, because I just
Mhm.
didn't want to deal with that. And so looking at your calendar like that and thinking ahead of like, what are some events that I don't want to miss? And I wouldn't take clients then.
Right, got it. Okay. I'm so curious. I feel like I want like a story right now of like, does a story come to mind of like the most maybe like a random on-call situation where you were doing something and then you're like, oh my God, I have to go now. Like, and you were shocked and like,
Yes.
you probably have a lot of them, but I'd
Um,
love to know one.
as far as being on call and being shocked, I go over in our client consultations. So I drill in so hard to them. You're not going to bother me. Please let me know when early labor is starting so that I can plan and be
Mm.
ready to go. Because what I don't want to get is a call that's like, hey, I'm pushing and I haven't heard from them in weeks. You know what I mean? Like, so we go into detail of like when to call and you're not going to bother me because they always think they're going to bother me.
Yeah.
And it's actually helping me if you give me a heads up versus like waiting until it's almost too late. So because of that, we don't get a ton of like last minute I'm pushing kind of things, but there have definitely been situations where moms are like chilling out of 4 centimeters, like A4. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
birth
yeah.
lingo for you. You'll get used to it. You probably already are like in the know with the birthy things. Um, chilling out of 4 and she goes to a 10 in like an hour, and there's
Mhm.
just, you don't expect that. And so there's so many things that I've learned about birth to really know signs that labor is progressing other than centimeters dilated. And so though I wasn't a doula, I didn't really have birth experience before I was a birth photographer. And so some of those things were just giving birth 3 times myself, as well as being in the birth community and knowing how birth works and what to look for. But there have definitely been times where it's like, I'm out with my family and I'm like, we got to go home. I've got somebody in labor, or I am definitely middle of the night. Like babies love to be born in the middle of the night.
Yeah, when the woman's relaxed, right? And the body is
Yeah.
able to like produce that oxytocin and start the uterus can start doing its thing. I'm learning so much right now. So I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
can like I actually know what to say right now.
Yeah. I love it.
Okay. I'm trying to see what else I wanted to ask or talk about. I feel like tuning in like intuitively right now to like my listeners, I feel like someone's probably thinking, okay, so if I'm working full time right now and I know I want to go into birth photography. Like I know I want it. I love it, but I only shot like two or three. How much what is something I can expect, like a time frame for me to go from what's possible? Like what's possible for me to like quit my job? How soon? Is it a year out? Is it 2 years out? And obviously this is such a tricky thing to answer because it depends on how much time you have to allocate every day and how focused you are, and how much you work on, activities in your business that are really the ones that move the needle the fastest, right? But is there like a range of time that you can like provide, that you've seen your students go from like working a full-time job to being able to quit and they're good to go?
Yeah. I would say the shortest time that I've seen somebody go full time is probably 3 to 6 months. But I would say the average is more like 12 to 18 months. And the reason is a lot of things, but when you're working full time, generally speaking, you're only able to give a small percentage of time to growing your business. And so I always tell my students that are working full time to give themselves grace and not to give up, because it might be taking a little bit longer because you're just not able to devote the time that you might need in those early phases of business. But we definitely have students who work full time and make it work. Like they work full time and they're a birth photographer, or they've been able to focus completely on birth photography and go full time. And so I would say, I would give yourself a year, like ballpark a year, if you're working full time and really focusing on those activities that you know are going to move the needle. And positioning yourself as a specialist is just like the biggest thing. There's so much resistance and fear around that. Even with my students, they're like, and it's like, I promise you, if you focus on positioning yourself as the birth expert in your community and put yourself out there in that way, people are going to start flocking to you. And what I've typically seen is it's not a trickle. It's like a nothing, 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 boom, like here's all
Yeah.
the clients. You know what I mean? It's like these things that you're doing are working and you can't quite see it yet. And then all of a sudden it just floods in.
Yeah, it's so true. You feel like you're like speaking to no one, no one's listening, no one gives a crap. And then out of nowhere, it's like, whoa, like that's exactly what I experienced as soon as I specialized. So, and that point right before where it's like, or I switched from being a generalist to specializing, it was winter time for me. And it was just like I got so depressed because it was like 3 or 4 months of me switching and confusing people and getting no inquiries and being like, oh my God, did I make the biggest mistake ever? And like doubting myself. And then out of nowhere, come the spring, it was like you just said, it was this boom and it never slowed down from there. So, yeah, everybody who's like terrified, it's normal to feel fear, but use fear as your compass. And on top of that, trust us, trust that we're saying to trust the process, because we are not like we're examples that's possible for you. And then so many other photographers are also examples of that. Um, Actually, one more thing that I want to ask you with everything that's happening right now with the pandemic and things being so like they're fluctuating, right? We never know what's coming up next. And in general, in life, we will never know what's coming up next. I'm curious about, the limiting belief that's stopping photographers from wanting to become birth photographers, being like, ooh, I don't know if it's possible for me right now because maybe hospitals won't let me in, or people won't want another person in their house with everything that's happening. So is there anything that you can address when it comes to that? Like, is that just a limiting belief, or is it more of a fact nowadays? Let
Yeah,
us know.
great question. I think that with something like this, and this is what I've been saying since the beginning of the pandemic, with a specialty like birth photography and weddings, I'm sure. There were so many things like birth photographers not allowed in hospitals, doulas not allowed in hospitals. And so what I encourage my students to do from the very beginning is make decisions based on actual facts and not fear. So step one is really looking at like, what are the facts? What are my hospitals allowing? What are birth centers allowing? What do families actually want? Instead of letting your mind like spiral and go like, well, I can't do it because hospitals won't let me in. People don't even want this. They don't want an extra person. It's like, is that actually true? Or is that something you're telling yourself because there is an obstacle? And it is an obstacle. It's not just like, no big deal. So it's really figuring out first, what are the actual facts of what is going on? Then second, for us, what we did during the pandemic is we went on marketing like normal, not like ignoring what's going on, but we didn't stop marketing. And when we would get inquiries, we would say, hey, we don't know what's going to be going on. We don't, I mean, like, it's not like weddings. They're not going to move their baby's like birth date. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, you
so
can't do that.
true.
So they're going to
Yeah.
have their baby whether or not you're there. And so it's like, okay, we would have contingency plans where we just emailed all of our clients and said, hey, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, much less 5 months from now when you have your baby. So our number one goal is this, to be at your birth. Our number two goal is a coming home session, which I can talk about. It worked really well for us during the pandemic. And if we can't do a coming home session, or you don't want a coming home session, then we will apply what you've paid minus on-call time towards a newborn session or a portrait session.
Mm. Wow, so smart. I love how you were able to not only serve them, be there for them in advance so it would make them not stress about it. And on top of that, problem solve for them to still get an incredible experience, even if not the ideal quote unquote happened for them. So that is incredible. And then on top of that, you're able to keep your income and not be worried and not say, well, this is all happening to me. I have no control, blah, blah, blah. You are the one in the driver's seat and you're making these smart decisions to get the results that you want in your life. So that's so smart. And yeah, tell me more about those coming home sessions actually, how they ended up going. And
Yeah,
yeah.
they were really, like you said, born out of necessity. It was like, okay, well, families still want these photos. And if we can't give them actual birth photos, what's the next best thing? And so we came up with coming home sessions, which is where we couldn't go into the hospital at all. So we would meet them in the parking lot and take photos of them, like leaving with the carrier, putting the
Mm,
carrier in the vehicle, and we would follow them to their home and take photos of them coming in and like introducing the baby to the grandparents or the older siblings and like settling the baby into the nursery and like their first few photos coming home. It really is a coming home session. And so we positioned it basically as the next best thing. And we
mhm.
weren't like, oh, well, if you want this, maybe consider. It was like, no, dude, this is awesome. Like, this is such a good idea. Let me tell you how awesome it is. And our clients were like, totally in on it. In fact, we started booking coming home sessions for people that didn't want birth photography, but they wanted coming home sessions.
Oh my God, mind blown. You know, it's so funny. I'm a freaking photographer and I'm thinking now I'm doing 7 weeks, right? And I am like, oh my God, I never even thought about having a coming home session or like even just like introducing our kid to our parents. Like, and I'm like, oh, maybe I want that. Like,
That's
like you just
awesome.
like even I like didn't even realize that and I'm a photographer. So yeah, it's just it's so valuable for you to just like share your ideas with your clients or potential clients and paint that picture of what it would feel like for them to have that experience, have those photos. And yeah, now this beautiful new type of session was even born out of all of this in your business. And do you enjoy photographing them?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different than birth photography because it's a little bit more, you're directing them just a little bit more. So, whereas birth photography is very hands off, I'm documenting things as they happen. Coming home sessions, there's a little bit more. So, it's almost more like a lifestyle newborn
Yeah.
session to an extent. And there is a different level of client preparation. So, like, she just had a baby, like, she's bleeding, like, she's postpartum, there's all this stuff. And so, thinking about how I would have felt being photographed is like, okay, how can I help prepare her for that, feeling that way, coming home, taking things slow, making sure that she knows there's plenty of time. We're not in a rush. Rest if you need to, if you want to feed your baby, like, we're not in a hurry. And so just explaining those things to her as well is super, super helpful for the client.
I love how you think so ahead. And yeah, because every single new offer that you have in your photography business, it has to have a whole new workflow to it. That's why, again, niching down. If you're niching down, you have so many fewer workflows to design and create and keep track of and update every year as well. Because yeah, you have to then think about, okay, well, what kind of experience do I want to create for them? Okay, I probably need to again over communicate in this type of scenario as well. So I need to tell her all these things. So I love that you go into the details like that with your clients because it just makes them feel so well taken care of. And then it's like no freaking, I'm not even surprised that you're this successful at what you do because I appreciate that so much in business and you just do that so well. So
Thank
thanks for
you.
sharing. Yeah, I think it's so, so powerful. Okay. So Is there anything else, Tavia, that is on your heart, on your mind that you feel like you want to share before we dive into sharing the resources that you have for everyone?
Man, I just think that if you're sitting there and you're afraid to niche down, if you're feeling like, especially with something like birth, like there's not enough people who want this, I can't run a successful business with this. I want to offer you something that positions birth in a similar light as weddings. If you think about birth as a wedding event, right? Like it's an event that you can then downsell and upsell additional sessions. So you don't have to think like, okay, I have to make $100,000 from birth only. It's from birth being the main event like a wedding, but also engagement session, boudoir, bridal, all these different things that go along with a wedding. You do the same with birth, a newborn, a maternity, then future baby plan, like a 6-month session, a 12-month session. So one birth can then turn into $10,000 plus of revenue for your business. And so when you're feeling like that's just way too many clients, like I can't do that, we position ourselves, and what I encourage my students to do is position themselves as a specialist. And on the back end, you're upselling and you have systems like I know Sarah probably talks to you guys about a lot on this show, to create systems on the back end to where you're like, okay, now I'm going to upsell a maternity session. Now I'm going to see if they want to add in newborn. So you're not flooding them all at once with that, but it's like trickled in throughout their entire experience. So a $2,000 package can go from a $10,000 plus client.
Yes, that's incredible. Thank you for expanding everyone's minds with that. That's amazing. Yeah. Okay, so I want to hear all about your resources that you have to offer. I know they have so much value in them. So I really am so excited for you to share them with everyone listening. And then after, let everybody know where they can find you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I think I might want to try birth photography. I like the idea of birth photography. Maybe you photographed a birth. I have a free training that will lay out my 6-step framework to confidently photographing birth. Because like we've talked about here, there's a lot of what ifs that go into birth. There's a lot of things to think about, not only on the technical photography side, like low light and do you use flash and settings and what is it like to be in a birth space, but also like what does post-processing look like? How do I behave in a birth space? Like when should I go to the birth? What if I have a porch? Like all the different things. So I broke it down into 6 steps to confidently photographing birth. Free training. It's at certifiedbirthphotographer.com/training. And if you guys want to connect with me on Instagram, I would love that. Instagram is my favorite, @_ the beauty and birth _ I had to have the underscore. Somebody has the beauty and birth, I guess.
Oh, that's the worst when it happens.
I know. And I keep checking back and they're still there. And I don't know. It's like, okay, whatever. Well, I'm just sticking with the underscores, I guess. We also have a free Facebook group for people that want to like get more information about birth photography. Just search the beauty and birth on Facebook and you'll find our Facebook group. We have over 5,000 birth photographers in there.
Amazing. Okay. So the Facebook group is, what was it called again?
The Beauty in Birth.
The Beauty in Birth?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. And then the certification training was at, what was the website again?
certifiedbirthphotographer.com/training.
Perfect. Okay, cool. And then I'll put it in the show notes for everybody as well. And yeah, if you're interested in, if you're like your heartstrings are tugging at, birth photography and everything that Tavia said today, definitely go grab that training because it's gonna, take you to the next level. So Tavia, thank you so much for your time and everything. I even had some like fun aha moments of like just the way you explain things. I love how you break things down, and my brain went creatively into like other areas of my business of how I can like apply certain things you said. So thank you so much. You shared so much value. I'm so grateful for you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I also have a podcast, which I didn't mention at all, from Better Half to Boss. So if you guys are like, we talk about a lot of birth and photography and all that kind of stuff over there too. So thank you so much for having me, Sarah. This was a lot of fun.
Amazing. And what's your podcast called? From
Better Half to Boss.
From Better Half to Boss. Amazing. Okay, everybody make sure to check that out as well. And yeah, thanks so much, Tavia. Yay! Thank you so much for hanging out with me and tuning into this episode. If you got value out of it, please feel free to message me on Instagram at Sarah Monica Photo. That's Sarah no H, Monica with a K photo, to let me know. I get so freaking energized hearing from others that what I've said has had a positive impact on their lives. Also, make sure to hit subscribe to the Shine and Thrive podcast to never miss an episode. I'm so grateful for you, and I'm sending you all the productive vibes your way so you have the best week ever.